You know, George, I said, my voice as soft as the rustling leaves around us. Today's weather is just perfect for a stroll in the park. My husband, George, a man whose face bore the lines of wisdom and a life well lived, nodded in agreement. Before I continue, I ask you to give a like to the video and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and you help me to continue bringing you more stories. Thank you. Let's continue. Indeed, it is Margaret. Brackenridge Park never disappoints. The warmth of the San Antonio sun did little to thaw the chill that had settled between us over the years. Brackenridge Park was alive with the sound of children laughing, couples stealing kisses, and the occasional bark of a dog. The air smelled of freshly mown grass and faint hints of barbecue smoke. A symphony of life I felt we were no longer a part of. You know, George, I began again. I've been thinking about trying some new things. Maybe it could be good for us. He raised an eyebrow. Curiosity piqued. What do you have in mind, dear? I took a deep breath, my heart racing. Well, I've read that mixing up your routine can help keep things, interesting. Interesting? George's eyes searched mine. A hint of understanding dawning. Ah, I see, he said with a knowing smile. As we approached the picnic area, the tantalizing smell of BBQ wafted through the air, mingling with the scent of freshly cut grass. A young man, no more than 30, played catch with his dog, his muscles flexing under his t-shirt. I felt a pang of longing, a reminder of the passion that had once filled our lives. The conversation grew quiet between us. The only sound, the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath our shoes. I couldn't ignore the ache that had been building within me for so long. The hunger for intimacy that seemed to grow more insatiable with each passing day. Finally, I broached the subject, my voice trembling slightly. I've been looking into some natural supplements that might help, boost things in the bedroom. George's eyes shot up his face, a mask of disbelief. What do you mean by that? He asked, his tone sharp, like I just insulted him. I took a shaky breath, trying to stay calm. Have you ever heard of Shilajit? My words hung in the air, thick with tension. He stopped mid-step, eyebrows arching in a mixture of confusion and amusement. Shilajit? What on earth is that? I bit my lip, feeling the weight of my vulnerability pressing down on me. It's an ancient remedy. It's from India, you see, and it's known to be quite potent. Apparently it can help with, performance issues. My voice faltered, the word lingering awkwardly in the air between us. He furrowed his brow, anger etching lines into his forehead. Margaret, you've been reading too many of those magazines again, he said, his voice gruff. The words stung, but I knew I had to persist. I'd read countless articles and testimonials about its benefits, and I couldn't ignore the promise it held for us. But George, I protested, my voice rising slightly. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patel, she swears by it, and it's all natural. Our conversation grew heated as we approached the pond. George's grip on my arm tightened as he pulled me aside, his eyes flashing with irritation. What are you trying to do, Margaret? He demanded, his voice low and strained. Make a fool of me. Make me feel even more inadequate than I already do. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I stood firm. No, George, I said, my voice steady despite the tremble in my chest. I'm trying to save us, to bring back what we've lost. The anger in his gaze softened, replaced by something akin to sadness. We've had a good life, Margaret. We can't hold on to the past forever, he murmured. With a heavy heart, we turned and headed back home. The silence that had once been comfortable now felt like a barricade between us. I knew I couldn't give up, though. I had to find a way to breathe life into our stagnant love. So the following day, I made my way to the small Indian herb store tucked away in the corner of the shopping center. It was a place I'd never been before, but the vibrant colors and exotic smells called to me like a siren song. Mrs. Patel had said I'd find it there. The bell over the door jingled cheerfully as I stepped inside, the scent of incense and spices enveloping me. Behind the counter, the young salesman looked up. a smile spreading across his handsome face. A smile spreading across his handsome face. His dark eyes met mine, and I felt a flutter in my stomach that was both unfamiliar and thrilling. "Welcome, ma'am," he said in a charming accent that made my knees weak. "How may I assist you today?" I approached him, my voice a little shakier than I'd intended. "I'm looking for Shilajit," I said awkwardly. "Do you have it?" His smile grew, revealing perfect white teeth. "The destroyer of weakness and giver of vitality." He gestured to a jar on the shelf behind him. "This is the purest you'll find in the city. It comes all the way from the Himalayas." My eyes lit up as he handed it over. The dark, sticky substance gleamed in the jar, and I couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the key to unlocking the passion we'd lost. "How do I use it?" I asked, eager to learn. "Mix a pea-sized amount in water or warm milk." He instructed, his voice gentle. "Let it dissolve completely and give it to your husband. It's best to take it on an empty stomach, so perhaps before breakfast." He totally caught me off guard by bringing up my husband. Talk about awkward. I couldn't help but wonder, how does he know I'm buying this for George? I was so deep in thought when he said, "It's for your husband." Right. All I could do was nod awkwardly after he handed it to me and I paid. I mumbled a quick thanks, feeling this weird mix of excitement and nervousness. This was my secret weapon, my last-ditch effort to bring the spark back to our relationship. I just hoped George would be open to trying it. Maybe this could be the miracle we needed to get things back on track. The next morning, as the sun began to peek over the horizon, I carefully measured out a pea-sized amount into a glass of warm milk. The dark substance clung to the sides, looking almost alive as it dissolved into the creamy liquid. "You know I'm doing this for us," I whispered, handing him the glass. His eyes searched mine for a moment before he took a deep breath and drank it down. He grimaced at the bitter taste but said nothing, his gaze never leaving mine. Throughout the day, I couldn't help but observe him. At first, there was no change, but as the hours ticked by, I noticed something different. He was moving with a newfound energy, his eyes bright, and his step more lively. He even went out to mow the lawn without my asking, something he hadn't done in ages. The sight of him pushing the lawn mower, sweat glistening on his forehead, brought a smile to my lips. But it wasn't just his physicality that had changed. There was a spark in his eyes, a glint that I hadn't seen in years. It was as if he'd been rejuvenated, like he'd found a hidden spring of youth deep within himself. I watched him, heart pounding, wondering if the substance was truly working its magic. George took a shower, the water running a little longer than usual. I could hear him moving about in the bathroom, and my mind raced with what could come next. Would tonight be the night that we finally broke free from the shackles of our aging bodies? When he emerged, he was dressed in his favorite pajamas, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. But what happened next completely threw me off. I was shocked when he didn't even notice me staring at him. He just walked right past, plopped down in his chair and stared out the window. I followed his gaze and saw the young woman from across the street, probably in her late 20s, doing yoga on her front lawn. He couldn't seem to peel his eyes away from her, and a green-eyed monster reared its ugly head in my chest. I felt the warmth of jealousy spread through me like wildfire, consuming my thoughts. Why was he looking at her that way? Did he wish she was the one he was going to spend time with tonight? Her youthful figure was a stark contrast to my own aging one, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of inadequacy. It was so ironic. My desperate attempt to save our marriage had disastrously backfired. In a fit of anger and hurt, I stormed into our bedroom, slamming the door so hard the pictures rattled on the walls. The echo of the door reverberated in my ears, a physical manifestation of the emotional turmoil churning within me. As I sat on the edge of our bed, the tears flowed freely, soaking the collar of my blouse. My chest heaved with sobs that seemed to come from a place deep within my soul. I looked at myself in the mirror, noticing the wrinkles and gray hair. Was this what George saw when he looked at me? Had I really become so invisible to him that he had to start ogling young bimbos? I didn't want to admit it. But maybe George's lack of interest wasn't just because of his age. Perhaps he'd been pretending all along just to keep me at bay. But why? Was I really that unattractive to him? The next morning I woke up feeling empty. The kind of hollow emptiness that eats away at you from the inside out. The pillow beside me was cold. George wasn't there. I frowned, heart sinking as I glanced around the room. But there was no sign of him. It was the same sickening feeling I had the day before, like I was slowly becoming a ghost in my own home. I dragged myself out of bed and made my way outside, trying to push the horrible thoughts that were clouding my mind. As soon as I stepped out onto the porch, I froze. There he was. George, out there mowing the lawn, but he wasn't alone. That damn girl, what was her name, stood by the fence, chatting away like she was part of the family. Her laugh echoed in the air, light and carefree. And my blood started to boil. My heart tightened in my chest as I watched them. The way George seemed so alive around her, I turned away quickly, my breath coming in shallow bursts. I couldn't stand to see it. I marched back inside, slamming the door behind me. The sudden rush of anger, hurt, and jealousy overwhelmed me all over again. How could he do this? After everything, he was just there, out in front of me, flirting with her like I was nothing. I threw open the closet doors, pulling out a low-cut dress, the one I used to wear when I wanted to feel good about myself. I hadn't worn it in months, maybe even longer. Today, though, it felt necessary. I needed to show myself that I was still capable of looking good. I needed to feel desirable again. My hands were shaking as I applied a little makeup, trying to bring myself back to life. My reflection in the mirror was a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. Sure, I was older, but I didn't look like some sad, forgotten woman. No, I looked good. Maybe not young, but I was still me. And I was going to make George remember that. I stepped out of the bedroom, my heels clicking on the floor with every step. I could hear George's voice from outside, but I didn't care. I didn't need his attention anymore. I was done playing the passive, understanding wife. I stormed out of the house, my eyes finding him immediately. He looked at me awkward, like he was caught, but I didn't stop. I didn't even look back as I walked past him. I saw him shift on his feet, probably trying to figure out what the hell was happening. But I didn't care. I wasn't waiting for him to explain himself. This wasn't about him anymore. Without a word, I walked straight out of the yard and onto the sidewalk. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way to the market. Every step felt like a declaration, like I was making a choice to reclaim myself. I didn't know what I was hoping to find there, but I needed to get away. I needed to be somewhere else, anywhere. But here, I entered the market, pushing open the door to the owner muster door, that diminutive store. It was calm in here, quiet, a safe space. And there he was, the young man from before, the one who'd sparked something in me. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and I felt a rush of heat that had nothing to do with the warmth of the Texas sun outside. Without thinking, I approached him, my back swaying in a way they hadn't in years. I said, my voice softer than I intended. He looked surprised, but not unwelcoming. "Mom," he greeted, his smile warm, his eyes lingering on my chest. I felt a thrill at his attention. I was wondering. I began leaning closer, my voice low and playful. "If you could recommend something for personal issues, something that could help with, say, energy." His gaze flickered over my body, a knowing glint in his eyes. For a woman like yourself, I'd recommend ashwagandha," he said, nodding. The way he said it so casually made me blush. It had been so long since anyone talked to me like I was still desirable. I leaned over the counter, my twin pushing against the fabric of my dress. "Tell me more," I whispered, my heart racing. He stepped closer, his cologne filling my senses, making me feel alive. It's an ancient hub, ma'am. It's known to boost libido. He winked. I smirked, my cheeks warming under his gaze. Oh, trust me, I said, lowering my voice just enough to be playful. Libido is the last thing I need more of. His grin widened, his fingers brushing mine as he leaned in slightly, the counter between us suddenly feeling like the thinnest of barriers. Weldon, he murmured, his voice a low that sent a shiver down my spine. Maybe I should recommend something to help control it instead. I tilted my head, my smile matching his. Control is overrated, I replied, letting the words hang between us like a challenge. For a moment, neither of us moved, the air heavy with an unspoken tension. Then with a quick flick of his wrist, he pulled a small jar from the shelf behind him and placed it on the counter. Yeah. Ashwagandha, as promised. Take it once a day or twice if you're feeling adventurous, he said, his voice light again, but his eyes still smoldering. I laughed softly, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear as I picked up the jar. My eyes not leaving his. I think we should talk more often. He grinned, and it was as if the world around us had melted away. I like that, missus. Call me Margaret, I said, my voice a peer. He nodded, his gaze holding mine. Margaret, he repeated, savoring the sound of my name. The tension between us was palpable, the air thick with it. It was like we were the only two people in the world. I took the bag from him, my fingertips brushing against his. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow, I suggested, batting my eyelashes. His smile grew wider. I look forward to it, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. With a flirty wave, I turned and left the store, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in what felt like an eternity. I didn't know where this was going, but I knew one thing for sure. It was going to be interesting. As I walked home, my thoughts swirled. What was I doing? Flirting with a young man, practically begging for his attention. But why not? I'd been starved for affection for too long. And if George didn't want me anymore, then I'd find it elsewhere. I had a right to be happy, didn't I? When I arrived home, George was still outside talking to that girl. I didn't bother to acknowledge them. Instead, I strutted straight to the kitchen, the herb in my hand. Margaret, George called after me, his voice tentative, but I ignored him, focusing on my newfound sense of power. I'd show him that I didn't need him to feel alive. In the kitchen, I brewed the ashwagandha into a tea, the aroma filling the room. It was earthy, exotic, and filled me with a newfound sense of excitement. I took a sip, letting the warm liquid soothe my throat. As the sun set outside, casting a soft orange glow through the windows, I felt stirring within me. It was more than just the herb. It was a rebirth of my spirit. I was done being the invisible wife. I went to our bedroom and slipped into something a little more comfortable. I couldn't get the image of that young man's dark eyes out of my head. They had looked at me with a hunger that George hadn't shown in years. I lay back on the bed, my hand drifting down. As I began, I thought of his firm stature, the way he moved with such confidence. I imagined him here with me. The thought made me shiver. I pictured him taking me, filling the void that George had left. I bit my lip, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't just want to fantasize anymore. I wanted the real thing. I wanted passion, and I was tired of expecting it from George. The next day, I returned to the store, my heart racing. He looked surprised to see me again so soon, but his smile was welcoming. Back for more. He's just looking, I replied, coyly, letting the words hang in the air between us like a playful whisper. His eyes danced over me, lingering on the curves that had been ignored for so long. And for the first time in ages, I didn't feel embarrassed or self-conscious. Instead, I felt desired. "Maybe I can give you a personal consultation," he suggested, his voice dropping to a murmur. I felt a rush of excitement, a mix of nerves and anticipation. "For that," I said, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "You'd have to be at some private place." His eyebrows raised slightly, a hint of surprise and intrigue in his eyes. "And where might that be?" I leaned in closer, my voice a whisper. "My home." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Heavy with implication. He looked at me, his dark eyes searching mine, and then he nodded slowly. "I'm finishing my shift anyway," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We walked out of the store together, the warm Texas sun bathing us in its golden light. I felt a thrill of excitement and nervousness coursing through my veins. This was really happening. I was taking a stranger home, a young handsome man who made me feel alive in ways I hadn't in years. The walk home was a blur of anticipation and adrenaline. He walked beside me, his presence both comforting and electrifying. I could feel George's eyes on us as we approached the house, his mouth agape in shock. But I didn't care. I didn't even glance his way. This was my moment, my rebellion. I led the young man straight to my room. The sanctity of my marriage be damned. The door slammed shut behind us, and suddenly we were alone in my most private space. The room was filled with the faint scent of my perfume and the lingering aroma of the ashwagandha tea. He turned to me, his dark eyes filled with a hunger that made my heart race. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I nodded, my breath hitching in my throat. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. What followed was a whirlwind of passion and desire. His touch was gentle, yet firm. His lips soft, yet demanding. I felt a rush of emotions, excitement, fear, and a sense of liberation. He wrapped his arms around me, and I melted into his embrace, twins pressing against him. His hand wandered around. All I could focus on was the insatiable hunger that had been building for so long. With trembling hands, I undid the buttons for him, revealing something which was everything I hadn't allowed myself to dream of. It was stark contrast to George's sad, weak thing. I didn't know where to begin. It was a powerful feeling holding that much power. After all, he worked at an herbal store selling vitality stuff. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and pulled me back. As we were at it, I felt a strange mix of excitement and guilt. But the craving inside me was too strong, and I pushed the thoughts aside. This was my chance to live. He looked into my eyes, searching for any hint of hesitation. But all I felt was need. When it finally started happening, it was like a dam had broken, and all the pent-up desire flooded through me. After that, as we lay there, our breath slowly returning to normal, I felt a sense of contentment. But it was short-lived, because what happened next blew my mind. He turned to me, his eyes soft and sincere. "Margaret, I love you," he said, his voice gentle. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "What?" I stammered. Disbelief etched on my face. He smiled, his eyes never leaving mine. "I want to marry you," he said, his voice filled with conviction. I set up my mind, racing. "Are you kidding me?" I asked, my voice trembling, and then it hit me. The realization that I had heard stories about young foreign men doing this to gain citizenship. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. How could I have been so foolish? You just want a green card, don't you?" I accused, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. He looked taken aback, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine or just an act. "Margaret, I get out. I said, my voice cold and firm. Just get out. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, gathering his clothes and leaving the room without another word. What was supposed to be my rebellion had turned into a reflection of everything I had lost, and now I was left alone with the echo of my own weakness.